Last week I met a very incredulous gentleman, a taxi driver. I was in this taxi cab, and after a few blocks he said to me, "Say, you wouldn't happen to be, would you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I wonder how I could ever convince anybody that you were in my cab." Well, I said, "Come to the office, and I will autograph a book for you. And then you can show them the autograph." He said, "They won't believe that you autographed. They will think somebody else did." And he said, "I want to show them when you're on television. I never get to see you on television. I have to earn my living, and Tuesday night I'm out hacking." I said, "All right, here's $5. Next Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, you go into a bar. You give $1 to the bartender and ask him, give him that as a tip. And then the $4 is to pay for not driving your hack for a half hour. And then, when we come on television, you can tell everybody at the bar." But he said, "Suppose they don't believe me." Well, I said, "I tell you what I will do. Next Tuesday night, I'll tell the story. Then they'll have to believe you. Now I've paid my debt." Would it please you if tonight we talked on the subject of communism? And the reason we're going to talk about it is because there's considerable confusion in our American life about communism. There's much emotional hate of communism and not very much thinking and reasoning about it for a long time, and even at the present time. Americans generally judge communism by Russia's foreign policy. Now, communism is not to be judged by Russia's foreign policy. If it is, well, then when Russia's foreign policy is favorable to the United States or the Western world, we're apt to believe that communism is good. And when Russia's foreign policy is unfavorable to the Western world, then we fall into the mood of believing that communism is wrong. It is well to realize that communism is wrong independently of Russia's foreign policy. In this particular telecast, we will outline for you, and inasmuch as we have communist listeners and we attempt to appeal to all listeners, we'll give them a little lesson in communist philosophy. And then for the benefit of the Americans, we'll tell you what is wrong with their philosophy. The two basic principles of communism, two of many, we will have time only for these two, are first what is called economic determinism. The second basic principle is man has value only as a representative of an economic class. We'll take each of these in turn. And inasmuch as my angel loves to blot out everything that is associated with communism, we'll give him a few seconds to do that. First, economic determinism. It sounds very, very learned. It means very simply, however, that culture, civilization, art, religion, philosophy, and morals are all determined by economic methods of production. My angel is just barely getting out of the way here, I see. You see, he has an extra large wing spread, about 21 inches. Other angels only have 17 inches. It makes it a little harder for him. The communist principle is that at the base of society is economics. This is the base. Economic method of production. And everything else, literature, art, morals, politics, religion, all are based upon the methods of production. For example, if your method of production at any given period of history is based upon private property, such as we have here in our democracy, or what we call private enterprise, the communists argue that your literature, your art, your morals and philosophy are all a superstructure and are ultimately based upon economics, but of and by themselves have no value. For example, your literature must be what kind of literature, the communists say? A defense of private property. Your morals. Morals are based upon economics, and hence, well, your commandments, the communists would say, are based on private property. Take, for example, the 7th and 10th commandments. Thou shalt not steal, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Communists say, can't you see that these two commandments are based upon private property? Stealing implies that particular method of production. So does the commandment not to covet your neighbor's goods. Politics, then, is based upon economics. You get a particular kind of a state which defends private property. Religion is based upon it. It's an opium, the communists say. It's an opiate that is given to the workers to make them content with their exploitation, leading them to believe that there's another world to make up for this one. Now the communists say, if you change your method of production, and instead of having private property and private enterprise, you have socialism. In other words, if you put all of the property in the hands of the state, then you have a new literature, morals, art, and philosophy. What kind of a literature do you have? You have a literature which attacks capitalism. You have a literature which makes fun of America. You have a literature of hate. Your morals, you have a new morals based upon economics. Then what is the basic thing that is wrong? Injuring or hurting state property, or in any way betraying the revolutionary class. Art then becomes communistic. And during the days here in the United States, when we were having a honeymoon with Russia, there was a considerable amount of art that was communist-inspired. You can see it in one of the big New York hotels today. You can see it in one of our public buildings. You can see it in some of the public buildings of Washington, sided in murals. Art in which there are pictures of big, tremendous, muscular men with little heads pushing wheels. No brains, no freedom, just production. Man is an economic tool. This is what is known as economic determinism. In other words, economics determines everything. What is the fallacy? Well, the first fallacy with economic determinism is that Karl Marx, who studied philosophy and who should have known better, confused what is known as a condition and a cause. For example, a window is a condition of light. But a window is not the cause of light. We are willing to admit that economics, to some extent, does determine, does condition literature and art. But it certainly does not cause literature and art. The fallacy of Marx was to make condition equal determination, which was a logical fallacy. Not only is it logically wrong, it's historically wrong. If economics is the cause of culture, why is it that in the pre-Christian era, on the one hand, you had the great Hebrew civilization, and on the other hand, you had, for example, a civilization like the Babylonian, the Chaldean, and others. These civilizations were totally different in kind. They had different religions, different moral concepts, this being the highest moral concept that was known to man in the pre-Christian era. But their economic methods of production were identical. Therefore, economics does not cause the difference in cultures. Take, for example, the Christian era. Rome during the first 3 or 4 centuries, the Roman Empire, had exactly the same economic method of production when it was pagan as when it was Christian. But the civilization and the art and the religion and the morality were totally different. Therefore, it is not the economics that determine civilization. See, economics has gone to the head of the communists almost like wine to an empty stomach. But notice that whenever they appeal to our Western world, whenever they would try to convince us of the superiority of their own system and our weakness, what words do they use? They say, for example, that we are immoral in germ warfare. When they spread that lie, they tell us that capitalism is unjust. They tell us that the way people are treated in the United States is unethical. We ask, by what right and what authority do communists ever use the words right and wrong if everything is economically determined? Ethics, right and wrong, truth and error do not belong in the economic categories. Communism is strong only when it borrows some of the moral indignation that has been inherited from the Hebraic Christian tradition. And communism is weak when it departs from that tradition. In other words, they have bootlegged all of the decency and morality that have come from the great Hebraic Christian tradition of the Western world. And they use it in order to condemn us, which is a reminder of how we ought to meet communism. In the Voice of America and elsewhere, not be talking about the supremacy of economics, because whenever we talk about the supremacy of economics, we are paying tribute to the communist era of the primacy of economics. They are telling the rest, speaking to the rest of the world in terms of ethics. We are speaking to the Western world, to the rest of the world, rather, in terms of economics. They are using the language that we ought to be using. We who pride ourselves on being moral and on being right. Then there is another aspect to communism, and that particular one is that man has value only inasmuch as he is a member of a class. In one of his earlier writings, Karl Marx, who was the founder of communism, said, "We have already destroyed the outer priest. Now we must destroy the inner priest. That is to say, man's clerical, spiritual nature." Then follows this very remarkable statement, in which Marx very correctly tells us the essence of democracy. And Marx knows the essence of democracy far better than many who enjoy it. Marx said, "Democracy is founded on the principle of the sovereign worth of every person. This, in its turn, is based upon a postulate, a dream, and an illusion of Christianity, namely that every man has an immortal soul. Then, coming to the first edition of his work on capital, Marx says, persons of and by themselves have no value. An individual has a value only inasmuch as he is a representative of an economic category and belongs to a certain revolutionary class. Outside of that, no value. And Molotov, more recently, carrying on that philosophy, developed the idea that bread is a political weapon. A political weapon. We thought that it was food for the hungry, regardless of who they are. Molotov said, no, bread is only to be given to certain people, those who share your own political revolutionary ideas. This is the basic principle of communism, and so true is it. Remember, some years ago, Haywood Broun told me there was a cartoonist on one of the communist sheets in New York, and the cartoonist developed cancer, was unable to work, and Haywood Broun went to the communists and asked them if they would not give him some pension or help pay his hospital bills, and the answer that he received from the communists was, he's of no use to us, he no longer is a member of a revolutionary class, and therefore for us he does not exist. That was good communism, but it's not good humanitarianism. That explains liquidation. The individual has no value. What it actually is an application to the human order of what prevails in the lower realm of biology, where individuals perish in order that the species may survive. An individual fly, an individual gnat, an individual ant is of no consequence in the lower biological orders. What is of importance is the species. Marx and communism have taken that notion out of biology, lower biology, and applied it to man, and says that what happens to an individual man is of no consequence. What is of importance alone is the revolutionary class, namely the species, communism. That explains what we have seen and read about in Korea, namely the communist tanks running over the bodies of their wounded. No one would ever take them out of the path of any of their great machines, because they're of no worth. It also explains the way they attacked our UN forces. The first line of attack carried guns. The second line of attack would carry mattresses, throw themselves upon barbed wire, be shot. The second group would also come up unarmed, and the third group would have guns. We in democracy would never do that to men. Every man is precious. Every soldier is precious. And this liquidation, man in the modern world, is not going to be met just simply by protests of horror. It means that we have to recognize the evil of this particular philosophy and begin affirming in the United States not just mass culture. We perhaps have had too much of that, namely an emphasis upon humanity, as Hitler put the emphasis upon race, as Mussolini put it upon nation, and as the communists are putting it upon a class. It is now high time to affirm in education, in politics and everywhere else, the sovereign worth of the individual. And that means that man has to get back to the true democratic concept, which Marx recognized, namely that every man is a soul. What we are attempting to do now in our Western world is to preserve the fruits of Christianity without its roots. That cannot be done. And what is unfortunate is that we of the Western world have the truth, but we have no zeal, we have no fire. What has happened to the great patriots, to our great champions of righteousness? The communists have stolen the Pentecostal fires. They have the zeal, but no truth. And we with the truth must also have heat and passion and fire, the kind of fire that the Savior came to cast upon the earth. Communists are right in saying this world needs a revolution, but not their cheap kind, which merely transfers booty and loot out of one man's pocket into another. We need the kind of a revolution in the United States and in the rest of the world that will purge out of a man's heart pride and covetousness and lust and anger and envy and gluttony and sloth. In other words, the true battle against communism begins within the heart of every single American. It means the recovery of our own great tradition, of our belief in God, of an affirmation in politics and in economic life.
Don't shoot now. Wait until he starts talking, then shoot him. Listen, I must tell you a story. It's an ecumenical story. It's about a priest and a rabbi. They met in a train in Ireland. They were alone in the compartment, and the priest said to the rabbi, he says, "Rabbi, honestly, have you ever eaten pork in your life?" The rabbi said, "If you keep a secret, I will tell you. I ate pork once." "Now," said the rabbi, "let me ask you a question. Did you ever kiss a girl?" He said, "If you keep it a secret, I will tell you. I did kiss a girl once." The rabbi said, "It beats eating pork, doesn't it?" Those are the kind of stories you can tell about religions that doesn't get anybody into trouble. Well, the title of this telecast, you remember, is about holding us together, because we're living in an entirely different age. Our new task is quite different. The new task is how to prevent ourselves from going to pieces. In other words, that ever since we split the atom, people are split. Races, nationalities, social groups. It seems as if almost all the rivets have fallen apart in the skyscraper of our civilization. Years ago, Conrad, the novelist, wrote a story about a ship in a river in Africa. The Captain Marlowe was pacing up and down the deck of this small ship. He was waiting for repairs. Along the shore, he could see the native Africans dancing, singing, mocking him. And as Marlowe paced the deck, he said, "Rivets, by heavens! That's what I need. Up there at the station on the hill, boxes of them piled open. Said you kick them as you walk along. They roll down the siding. And here I don't have a single rivet to put my plates together. And this was the contrast between these carefree people and a technical civilization that was all at loss for progress because there were no rivets. Now that's what's making us fall apart. The absence of some unifying principle. Just let me give you now some examples of how we're falling apart. I will take education and literature and maybe philosophy and a few other things. First of all, take education. It used to be centuries ago that there were universities. Now, the word university means something that turns about one thing. And what was that one thing? Well, in the Middle Ages, it was theology. All sciences were, as it were, in relation to that. And later on, it became philosophy. Another university, the microbic content of cotton undershirts. What a wonderful thesis that was. PhD. But I think the prize was one of our well-known Eastern universities, a psychological study of the post-rotational eye movement of squabs. Then take the press, rivets falling apart, and TV, even. Here, for example, on TV, suppose I were a news commentator. I would show you, for example, here is a clip that has just come to us this afternoon from Vietnam. That shows a bomb dropping on one of the cities of Vietnam in which 10,000 people were killed. More details of this horrible massacre will be unfolded to you after this brief announcement. The white knight will clean your dishes. Think what becomes of us. It means that both are meaningless. When we can shift so quickly from a story of horror and death to this insignificant detail about soap. Then the press is interested in getting your opinion and yours, everybody's opinion. Not because of the opinion itself, but to set it in contrast with someone else's opinion. So, as long as there's conflict, there's news. What's the purpose of opinions? Are we trying to develop a meaning and a philosophy of life? And this has so much affected personalities that today many minds have no unifying pattern of life. They read one book, maybe a bestseller, and they say, oh, this is a great idea. And they lay down the railroad tracks on which they will move. Then next week they read another book, and they tear up those tracks. They were a materialist last week. Now this week they begin to be an idealist. And as life goes on, they never have one goal or one purpose. No rivets in life. Now this is serious. If this were a class in school, in a university, I would go more into detail. But just let me go through famous writers and thinkers and give you their concept of this rivetless civilization. 200 years ago, de Tocqueville, who wrote a great deal about America and who foresaw America, said Americans are going to be superficial. They'll be interested in the surface of things and will not get down to depths. Then if you take those who have made a study of Grecian democracy, what made it fail, the Middle Ages, what made it fail, our contemporary civilization, you get always the same answer. There was nothing to hold civilization together. For example, Jaeger. Those of you who are in the university probably have read Jaeger. His work on Peoria, which Jaeger shows that the Greek democracy of the pre-Christian times went to pieces just as soon as it lost its gods, its faith, and its myths. Collingwood wrote about the Middle Ages. Collingwood said that the Middle Ages went to pieces just as soon as it lost its faith. Politics and economics, he said, began to be independent of theology and morals and ethics. Philosophy was separated from theology, and the unity of civilization decayed. In our modern times, Reinhold Niebuhr compares our civilization to Babel, in which he says men are confused. Each one is trying to make himself a god, and finally eventually to reach the heavens. And the attempt fails. And Toynbee wrote 10 volumes called A Study of History. And he says that our age is suffering from a schism of soul. That is to say, we've lost all of our unity, and we're like the pyramid builders. What he said was Egypt trying to do when it built the pyramids? It was trying to forget the slavery of people. And so upon all of that forced labor was erected this monument to resist decay, and it became the very basis of decay itself. I wonder if going to the moon, $77 billion a year in preparation for war, is not another Babel. Is it not based not upon slavery, but upon a neglect of the poor? May it not end as Egyptian civilization ended? These are the questions which thinkers are asking. I've just tried to put it simply in terms of rivets, which hold the plates of our economics and politics and education and everything else together. Now there's a danger, a grave danger in our civilization. Today the catchword is freedom. Someday we'll explain the 3 ways in which freedom can be understood. But freedom today is interpreted as license, as freedom from law, not freedom for something. When you have a culture fissioned, split up, and divided, and minds without any goals, you have chaos, which is becoming more and more apparent in civilization. What is the danger? The danger is that there may come along someone who will attempt to get us out of this chaos by creating some kind of maybe totalitarian state. In other words, a dictatorship arises in order to organize the chaos that was created by too much freedom. As a Russian writer put it, who had been through the communist revolution, and if you keep these words in mind, they may help to interpret future civilization. Unlimited freedom leads to unlimited tyranny. Communism was only an organization, forcible organization of a chaos. When shepherds cannot get their sheep to follow them, they send dogs after them. We're in danger of having dogs run after us to organize us out of this chaos. As Dostoevsky, the French novelist, put it, he said, I wouldn't be at all surprised that there might arise out of our cities in some future day someone unlearned would say, let's knock to pieces all of this supposed wisdom. Let us smash all of our logarithms to pieces. Let us go our own way. And you'll be surprised how many followers we will have. I know it's not a pleasant picture, but I'm just trying to keep up in what's happening in the world. And not just to be a part of this rivetless culture. Now, what will hold us together? Knowledge? No, not knowledge alone. We have indeed eaten of the tree of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil. We've picked off the fruit, and now we're eating the leaves. And knowledge, anyway, when it's about things above, always demands that we break up those noble things to fit our poor intelligences. What can unify civilization? Love. Oh, yes, but how that word is misused. The Greeks had 4 words for love. 4. Believe me, when we say the Greeks had a word for it, they did. Someday I may give a telecast on those 4 words. But today, we have only 1 word for love. Certainly we can call in an absolutely unprejudiced witness in the novelist Faulkner. Let me read you what he says. In other words, this is not the kind of love